And if you would like to not be recorded, you can remove your name and image. But for the most part, the only people who will be recorded are those who are speaking. And so I'm going to introduce the speakers for the presenters for this session. Okay, this session is entitled "The Greater Chaco Art Zines" by Jeanette HartMann and Asha Canalos. So I'm going to give it over to them so they can start their presentation.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Asha Canalos, and I'm here with Jen HartMann. I want to first acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Pueblo peoples here in Albuquerque. And today we're going to be discussing the Greater Chaco Art Zines. And bear with us, we're going to set up a little bit of tech here to get some pictures going. So this project, this zine project, it was initiated in September of 2018. But as you'll see, it's really a project that very much took on a life of its own, especially after a censorship occurred. And it really led us to more projects ultimately. So we want to put it out there as a case study in community engaged and socially engaged art practice, as well as a case study in the freedom of speech and censorship issues that came up. So I just want to start by giving you all just a really very basic background about the on-the-ground realities that are happening right now in the greater Chaco landscape, and the challenges that are being faced. There's been a lot of national attention, even global attention, on the efforts to preserve the Chaco Canyon National Historical Park. We're looking at an image of it right now. And the efforts have been to protect it specifically from fracking, from oil and gas development that is really encroaching on this area. And it's a World Heritage Site, it's a UNESCO site, is really unparalleled examples of architecture of the ancient Puebloan people. And while it's of course really important to do all that we can to protect these archaeological sites, what a lot of people really don't realize is that there are living communities who are also under siege in this area. Lots of communities who are living right around the area of the greater Chaco landscape and are also under siege. These communities are largely Navajo, they're largely Diné, and they are being disproportionately affected by this industrial development. The impacts are to community health and to ecological systems. So let's keep going. Let's show some images. And next slide. These are images of some of the fracking that's happening. Next one, I think we can move to. And next one. And in the San Juan Basin right now, over 91% of all public lands have been leased by the Bureau of Land Management to the oil and gas industry. So what we're ultimately fighting for in a lot of cases is the remaining 9% of public lands that are not currently being leased. And also to begin to ban actually, this fracking that's happening. Ultimately, that's the goal. So the Greater Chaco Coalition is a coalition of all kinds of people, environmental NGOs, indigenous groups, local impacted community groups. It's really unique in its diversity. It began about 7 years ago. And it's also, we've got a lot of individuals who have joined on, including artists and scholars and writers and filmmakers, et cetera. And really, there's a lot of strength in that diversity that has occurred, this kind of unification of these otherwise maybe disparate groups and individuals who have come together to fight. Next slide. think we have a couple of the coalition here. And so basically, you can learn a lot more about the Greater Chaco Coalition if you go to frackoffchaco.org. There's tons of information there. But I think one of the things that's really important to say is that activists and allies are really looking for ways to speak to people who are outside of the choir. We've really recognized that one of our main challenges is that we end up creating information and creating amplification projects and not necessarily always getting them to people who are not already in the know. And Jen can take over in the next section with the land arts coming into that. Oh, this is also, these are images from a benefit auction that we had. These are some of the efforts that the coalition has already, gone through to get word out there. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Jeanette HartMann, and I'm director of the Land Arts the American West program and assistant professor of art and ecology at the University of New Mexico. So I just want to start by sharing a little bit about the Land Arts program. Land Arts of the American West is an interdisciplinary studio arts program committed, really, its mission statement is to support environmentally and socially engaged art practices through field-based bioregional teaching, collective learning, interdisciplinary research, community collaboration, and in creative forms of publication and exhibition. The course includes a series of field labs at specific locations throughout the Southwest where students and faculty camp together, travel together, explore sites through embodied creative research, and meet with community residents to learn directly from them and their deep knowledge of the land and current issues they face. Students from those experiences produce art both on-site and off-site. And this is just a picture, like a collage of many of the different things and places we've done and gone to. This is actually El Vado Lake in New Mexico. So one of the most exciting, and powerful aspects of this experience is getting out of the classroom and the studio even together and sharing our learning and creative process during these field labs. During this time, students undertake a wide variety of research processes that are both familiar to them, employing traditional art making mediums and technologies such as painting, drawing, photo, kind of sculpture, and also more embodied, generative, and emergent processes that come from actually being a body in these ecological environments and communities, and working intuitively and performatively with what's at hand, which leads inevitably to new forms, processes, and methods. This is actually in Gila, New Mexico, when we were doing a project on the river. So the program is student-centered and geared towards mentoring each student independently as they focus on their particular questions and creative research, but is also done within a collective community as the group travels, learns, and practices together. A big part of this process also involves programmatic, student-led, and driven collaborations. I believe, and the program believes, that collaboration is essential to the success of all creative practitioners. And in the simplest terms, it's a set of relational skills that we can easily teach one another, while on the other hand, it's one of the most challenging and transformative processes of creative and critical engagement we can participate in. When I became director of Land Arts in 2015, I began organizing some field labs in relationship with environmental justice issues that were deeply ingrained in the landscapes that Land Arts had been exploring for years. Land Arts actually was established in 2000. And so, these landscapes and issues that were happening there, we had never really stopped and talked about and looked at. So this began a multi-year commitment to exploring extraction, environmental racism, and decoloniality within the Four Corners region of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, through learning about uranium mining, coal, and oil and gas extraction and fracking, and their effects both on the environment, but also on community wellness. So fundamental to this was asking for guidance and permission from local communities and leaders to really learn alongside them and find out, you know, in a way, how it could be of service. And so, you know, and a lot of this too, this is actually Malcolm Benally, is a filmmaker and lives on Black Mesa. And so he was actually sharing with us issues around Peabody coal mine. So with this experience over those couple of years, students would come back to the university and create pieces of work, different art projects out of that, and then share them at the university. Inevitably with, you know, our partners collaborating in more informal capacity, we also did some public projects in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And really the intention behind this was to create an educational space for the students to really learn about what was happening, to raise their awareness, but also to really ask, like, well, what's the role of the artist, you know, in knowing what's happening in our local environment, and how can artists really amplify these issues, not necessarily be the voices, you know, of these communities, but really amplify the experiences that they had and share that with a larger public. So I'm going to turn it over to Asha.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the actual process of creating the zines, and that begins probably with a bit of touching on why zines in the first place. And in a lot of ways, we're drawing on the zines' history of being disseminated in usually a political fashion. They're relatively cheap to make. They can be handed out, and then even those people can go on to hand them out. And so there's this kind of way that the zines fit quite naturally into that, because in a lot of ways, we're very specifically trying to make this accessible to the very communities that we're creating this for and working alongside with. And a lot of those communities in this area around the Greater Chaco landscape don't have access to the internet. Those are not as easy of a format to share information by as they might be in other places. So we're really looking for something that's physical and tangible to give out and have go out into the world and get this information out in possibly a new way. And we started the process by meeting with Daniel So, who is a representative of the Navajo Nation. He's a councilman on Navajo Nation currently. And he gives a tour called Fracking is Fracking Reality Tour. And he's been giving it a while. He's an amazing person. Jen and I have both been on the tour numerous times. And he was really our main leader in this landscape, bringing us through these areas. Next slide. I think there's a couple of slides of this process of going on the tour. Here's Daniel really pointing out some of these locations to us. And the artists are really getting a feel for what it's like to live in these frack fields. A lot of people live right up next to them. Next slide. So the next thing that we did was to meet with an additional set of people who were community members. Mario Atencio, Samuel Sage, Beata Sosi Pena, were all indigenous community members, leaders, who really generously took the time to meet with us and to share very personal, very emotional sometimes accounts of how fracking had impacted their families, their lives, and their communities. Next slide. And what we did was really try to be deep listeners as much as possible. And here are some images from actually making the zines, and everything that we made, every quote that we used from these community members, we made sure that it was approved by those people, and that people were being portrayed in the way that felt right to them. That was really important to all of us throughout this. Next slide. So we created them over 24 hours. Here's an unofficial portrait of the artists. Next slide. We created these zines over 24-hour period, basically on site at Angel Peak campgrounds. And here are some of the images that came out of it. Here are some of the pages from the zines. Unfortunately, we don't have time to show you a lot of them, but next slide, here's a few. And as soon as they were printed, they were used. They went to the Albuquerque Zine Fest. They went to all kinds of community meetings that occurred. They went also to a number of our colleagues who requested them for their curricula at different schools. They went to the University of Maryland. They went to SVA and Parsons in New York City and several other places. Here are the 3 zines that we created in that time. So as soon as, these went out into the world, that's the Albuquerque Zine Fest. Here's a couple others. And this was actually a community meeting, the first community meeting where they were used and distributed to a few hundred people. Really, literally hot off the presses. And the more that we used them, the more they were in demand. The more we just printed more because people wanted to use them for different events. So here's Jen again.
So, so what we're looking at right now, you kind of got a update on the zines, was how we actually displayed them at the university gallery, art gallery, at the end of the semester for the Land Arts program. And so wall text, the zines, we were distributing them actively. We were seeing that as core to sort of the artistic sort of dissemination, right? Really a core part of the project itself was the fact that they're mobile and they're passed from hand to hand. And this is another page excerpt from the zines. So in mid-March 2019, the Greater Chaco Coalition received an email from Rebecca Aubin, who was head of education and visitor experience from the New Mexico Museum of Art. And she was requesting use of one of the zines for this exhibition. This is a screenshot from the museum's website, and this exhibition, Social and Sublime, Land, Place, and Art. So it was brought to Asha's attention that there was this request. The coalition group was really excited to think that, oh, well, these zines are going to go out even to another public, right? The public that attends to the museums, so we can even share what's happening to this broader audience. So they were really excited about it. Asha contacted myself and my colleague, and we were really excited about it. So then started this several-week kind of conversation with the museum about, kind of what zine they wanted, how many copies they wanted, who was going to print them, who was going to pay for printing, what was the label going to look like, et cetera, et cetera. And so we came to some conclusions that we would have to pay for the zines. So we had both Land Arts and colleagues within the Greater Chaco Coalition, bring some funds together to print 1,100 copies of this zine for the museum. And then Asha delivered the zines on April the 12th to the museum. And as you can note here, the opening for this exhibition was April the 13th. So at that point, Asha and I were really busy. I was teaching and, programming for Land Arts. I had a big exhibition, and Asha, has multiple full-time jobs as well. So we didn't really think about it. We thought, well, we dropped the zines off. They're in really good hands, right? They're probably in the best hands possible. They're in a state-run institution with all, the staff and infrastructure is meant to care for art. That's their mission, is to care for art. So we didn't, really think about it. And then in mid-May, the University of New Mexico Art Department got an email from a gentleman in Santa Fe. And the gentleman said, hey, I found these boxes, these zines right on the sidewalk outside of my house, and they were there for 3 days. And I didn't, it was kind of weird. So finally, after 3 days, I decided, well, I'll open one and see what's in it. And it had our name on it, Land Arts, and And so he tracked us down through the internet. And so the next day I decided to go visit him, and I went to Santa Fe and talked to him, kind of found out what had happened, and hence, behold, it was these boxes of this zine that had gone to the museum. And so I thanked him for, getting the zines and handing on, really tracking us down and getting them back to us. And then afterwards decided, I better go over there and just kind of see what's happening. So I went over and, paid my admission fee, went into the exhibition, looked around, and there were no zines anywhere. So after that, I tried to contacted the museum, and I wasn't getting immediate response. I think by the next day, I finally got an email from her, which was kind of cryptic. It said, oh, I received an email from the cabinet secretary, and I'm so sorry this decision happened, but I'm trying to distribute these zines around Santa Fe. And then attached to this email was an email from between the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs cabinet secretary and her legal counsel, which was really, it was a whistleblower email that said, this is why these zines are being removed. So after we received this, Asha and I got together, and we were very confused and very concerned about what was happening, not just for the zines and our own, our own sort of artistic stake in this, but because we were responsible to all the other artists and our community partners, and the fact that we felt that this was extremely important issue that was really grounded in environmental racism. And here we go, once again, the institution, right, is playing this really heavy hand. And so with, the blessings of all of our partners and collaborators, we went forward with an exchange of letters. They would not respond to us, so we started hitting official channels. We sent them official letter, sent them an official letter. They sent us an official letter back that said, basically, oh, we're so sorry, things changed in the exhibition, so it was no longer relevant to this exhibition. We're sorry that happened. And so, what we discovered was that through these exchanges that we were missing a lot of information. There was a lot of information that was not being shared with us, and that really concerned us. And so we decided to go through more official channels, and what is at a federal level, Freedom of Information Act. At New Mexico level, it's the Inspection of Public Records Act. So we actually sent an official a letter requesting all documents that had to do with this issue, and received over the course of a month 2 packets, one of which said, hey, this is going to take us a really long time, the state said, because we have a lot of redactions that are possible. And so after a month time, we ended up with 454 pages of very messy documentation that really made no sense. It wasn't in any chronological order. It was very confusing. And so Asha and I felt, really what we wanted to know what happened. So we spent time compiling this timeline to really put together not only the IPRA documents, but to also look back at our own documents, because what we discovered was there were actually some missing gaps in the IPRA. I'll pass it back to Asha.
So this process of creating this timeline, which is an image that we just saw, and translating what we received into this timeline, all this kind of process of discovery, of research, ultimately we realized that it was becoming an art project, another art project. And in this case, this responsibility, this accountability, this investigative work and knowledge building became this generative art act. And so this is an image of the timeline, and the timeline itself became an art piece in this arts publication called Workbook. Next slide. And then we had a panel talk on that. And this was part of an effort. We started realizing, oh my God, this has really happened. This has truly happened. We have been censored. And it's because the content is, to quote, political. That's the real reason. And so we have to get this information out there. People have to know about this in order for anything to change. And how wrong that these voices were suppressed, that our community partners who are being directly impacted, everything that they have said to us and shared with us is being silenced in this process. So our focus became on how do we get press to get involved in this? And that was really a whole other process, which required that we built a lot of different relationships very quickly. Next slide. So we created a petition, which is still up on the Action Network. Next slide. And then we also created a whole website, because every time we brought it up, people had so many questions. It was a very long and convoluted kind of set of things that happened to prove what had happened. So we created a website so people could really quickly get that information. Next slide. And this was all kind of leading to us getting some kind of press to cover this, which was incredibly difficult. It's one thing to make an accusation that something has happened to you, but it's very hard to prove unless people are willing to go through hundreds and hundreds of documents. So the National Coalition Against Censorship became a really important ally to us in this process. And they wrote the first article. Here's an image of that, which led, next slide, to us working with a journalist named Elizabeth Miller, who was able to get the story into an arts publication, a national arts publication called Hyperallergic. And so we felt like we were starting to get our job done, and we were really starting to get the information out there. But Jen, I'll tell you kind of the next stages of that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think through this whole process, as you can imagine, we're still left with lots of questions. Questions as artists, questions as teachers, questions as, partners, community partners, questions as to what happened and what, what maybe we could have done better, what we could have done different. Yeah, lots and lots of questions. Also questions as to how do artists grapple with this? How do, students grapple with this? How do museum workers, curators, how does the public deal with this? And what do we know our rights to be? For example, knowing that you have a right to ask for official documents, right? From especially government, right, public institutions. And so what this has really led to is Asha and I beginning a process which we're calling Chronicle of Disappeared Arts, CODA. And it will kind of take form over the next year. It's going to be also part of an international arts programming called Extraction: Art on the Edge of the Abyss. And at this point in time, we aren't really clear on the form this is going to take, but our desire is to create a space that artists and projects, creative projects, I think in a very wide sort of, kind of specific, what am I trying to say? Some geared towards environmental justice issues, but, across disciplines, really inviting folks to come forward to share their work, work that has been kept from the public, and to create a space that really allows it to live and thrive and be in the world. And so at this point in time, we're asking you, we're asking others to reach out to us and let us know if you have thoughts on what you think the ideal form would be. If you know folks or you yourself have been censored, reach out to us. We're really interested in creating allegiances together to make sure that your work is given the space that it should have. And also, I think, too, to address this issue in terms of censorship, and support, really support for one another, because I think that that's what's been so great with this process is, you know, Asha had each other's backs, but we also had our community collaborators, the student artists, like we were here together to deal with this. And sometimes, you know, if you don't always feel like you have that community support, it can be hard to take on something like this. So anyways, yeah, so that's it. But we really thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both for sharing. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, and I just encourage you, if you don't, you know, have a question right now, but if something kind of, you know, percolates out, or you have a thought, or you have, you know, some idea as to, you know, either CODA or even this whole messy process, you know, feel free to reach out to us. If you can find our contact, we have a contact form on our website. So just go to the Greater Chaco Art Zine .org. And you can contact us. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I just wanted to add, one of the things, you know, in realizing that we had been censored, which was, we didn't even really want to believe at first. One of the questions we immediately had was, you know, who else has this happened to? What other stories are out there? How are people connecting around this issue, or are they even? So that's why we would love to hear from you guys about this. And any thoughts you have, please send them our way. We'd be really pleased to hear them. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Hello, it's Caitlin.
Hey, Caitlin.
And Asha. I love you both so much. It's been so nice to hear your voices. I have a lot of questions, and I think certainly some kind of like blossoming ideas, and would love to talk more about that. But I'm also just kind of going along with the story. Like, what did the museum actually, did they take responsibility eventually? Like, I mean, dropping off zines on the side of a road is just such a strange thing. And did they tell you, like, how come they didn't contact you before? It's like, they like were holding this hostage, you know, and the information hostage as well. And so like, what was I just am interested in a little bit more of like that part of the story. Like, did the museum eventually take responsibility? And if so, like, what did they say?
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. They have really fought tooth and nail. One of the things that happened was when we were working with the NCAC was that they helped us to really change the nature of our petition, not just to ask them to admit that the censorship had happened, but instead to put a focus on asking them to create a new policy going forward that would support artistic freedom and freedom of expression. And the NCAC offered to work directly with the museum to craft that new policy. The museum and the Department of Cultural Affairs outright refused to do that. They outright refused to create a policy affirming artistic freedom. So that's where we stand. They're still not really admitting it, although we have very clear proof of what happened. And we, you know, really believe that they fumbled the situation. They could have turned this into an opportunity to create that kind of safety mechanism for artists and communities, to create dialogue around these important issues instead of suppressing it. But they chose not to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that that's just really key. But I do want to say, like, it's like all these foibles, right, that took place. It's like the zines on the sidewalk actually was what we figured out was just an accident. The head of education, when she was told she had to get the zines out of there, they weren't allowed to be on state property anymore. She had them in her car. And her car, she went on vacation and her car got broken into and somebody stole them and then was like, what's this? I don't want a bunch of boxes of zines. And so they left them on a street side, right? But I think, so, you know, it was like a series of just really, you know, uncanny, you know, unpredictable things that happened, but that allowed us to actually get keyed into it. But I think the important thing is what Asha said, is like, you know, that there's so much sort of politics and power wrapped up in this, which is hence, you know, kind of the reason why it was censored is, you know, the state government's connection with oil and gas is huge. I mean, it's a huge part of our state revenue for education.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I mean, we don't have any documentation that says that's the reason, but based on some of the reasons that came through the IPRA of, you know, it being too political, about it being connected to these organizations that would somehow, it would always came back to politics. And it was like, you know, it was pretty cut and dry, but, you know, they really could have like said, hey, yeah, let's figure this out for the future so that we can protect our staff, we can protect the mission of our institution, right? We can protect artists and artwork. And we can protect the public too, right? And because it's also about the public. Mm-hmm. And they refuse to do that.
Yeah, and one of the really shocking, really kind of chilling things, I had before this been in a case on the border of Pennsylvania and New York, a U.S. Court of Appeals case against a pipeline, which is what gave me some of the reason to be involved in all of this here. And so in that process, I saw up close how much goes into the smoke and mirrors that's happening between oil and gas industry and the regulators who are regulating it, but are really very much in bed with them, very much revolving door there. And how much the public is pushed out of the conversation entirely. There's all these mechanisms to make it look like we're engaging the public and we're letting the public in, but really the important decisions are happening behind closed doors. And what's really chilling is to see that that's also happening in these highly regarded arts organizations and in these you know, in these museums and Department of Cultural Affairs, that they're also really capable of this really slippery language that's designed to keep you feeling little, keep you from knowing what's happening, and is just very evasive, very, you know, obfuscating the truth. Like they're really doing the same thing. It's paralleled. So that was really disturbing to see. But I think it's something that people need to know. Yeah. Artists, you know, really need to be aware of that, and we need to be fighting to have a voice about these meaningful issues. You know, art is not just something pretty to look at. It might be that, but it's a whole lot more than that. And museums have a responsibility to the public. State-sponsored organizations have a responsibility. So I don't know. That's some of the things that we learned along the way.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for answering that. I'm going to stop recording this session, and we have 3 minutes until the next session, but thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.